Hello, I'm Jeff Livingston, the historian of the Hawaiian Railway Society. We've been doing a number of these programs and speaking primarily about the common carrier railroads, specifically the Oahu Railway and Land Company, and the various other smaller roads, the Ko'ola Railway, and haven't gotten too far outside of that realm. Today I'd like to talk about what's happening in Honolulu. As the city began to grow, transportation was just as critical within the city as outside of the city. And as early as 1868, the Pioneer Omnibus Company was running omnibus throughout the city, providing transportation to its citizens. Unfortunately, we have never uncovered a photograph of one of these omnibuses, either from that time or later on, because they were around for quite a while. If you're not familiar with an omnibus, it is essentially a very large stagecoach that ran a specific route at specific times, and you could move from place to place. You paid a fare. It could have been pennies, it could have been a nickel. Usually around that time, the maximum fare was 5 cents, and the distance traveled was more than you could comfortably walk or that you had time to spend, and for the price it was considered a good deal. The idea of street railways began around 1880. There was talk within Honolulu and within the government, and as part of the general effort to get railways into the islands, the street railway was also included. And a specific street railway bill was passed by the government in 1882. Now, there was one guy at that point, William Flowerdew, that looked at this as an opportunity. And in 1883, he began an effort to raise money to start a street railway in Honolulu. He was somewhat successful. He had some capital and had actually begun some construction when in 1884 he was stopped by the government. Specifically, the Minister of the Interior, Gulick, told him he did not have permission nor franchise or authority to build a street railway. Now, Flowerdew was under the impression that the previous Minister of the Interior, John Bush, had granted him that permission, and that's why he started. This was followed later that same year by almost like a competition. And the first time the legislature and the Hawaiian government actually put a bidding war in place, where if you wanted to build the street railway, you had to come to the government and have the highest bid to get the franchise and the permission to build the railway. Now, during this time, you either walked to and from where you were going. You could take the omnibus if it was going where you needed it to. You could hire a horse and buggy, and that was not really inexpensive. You figure at least 50 cents back in the 1880s, 1890s to hire a horse and a buggy. And if you were of the wealthier class, you of course would probably own your own horse and buggy and possibly a driver, but you were saddled with the expense of the maintenance, the salary for the driver, the feed for the horse, care for the horse. So moving around the city could be not only difficult, but it could be expensive. So as Honolulu continued to grow, there was a crying need for a comprehensive street railway system that could move people within the city and to the outskirts with a higher degree of efficiency and a lower cost than what was currently available. Now, the bill to award the contract, issued in 1884, wound up with the issuance of the contract to a consortium led by a fellow named Austin. Now, there were two competitive bids. Austin won the bid, and it turns out that Austin was in fact the attorney for the first guy, Flowerdew. And government being then pretty much what government is still, mass confusion then erupted, and no one knew for sure who had the contract. But construction did begin in August of 1885. But it wasn't until May of 1888 that the Hawaiian Tramway Company was actually formed. In those intervening years, between 1884 and 1888, some very minor construction was begun. Some streets were equipped with some degree of track, but there was no operational street railway system during any of that time. The citizens of Honolulu still had to rely on the omnibus, hiring a horse and buggy, or using their own horse and buggy. The breakthrough came when a consortium of London entrepreneurs, we would call them venture capitalists today, got together and they formed the Hawaiian Tramway Company in May of 1889. Now, this was the same year that the Oahu Railway and Land Company received its franchise and began construction. So although the street railway idea started well before the common carrier railroad, they were actually started at the same time. One of the problems that came up eventually, you notice I said there was London entrepreneurs or venture capitalists. These were all bonds sold in London, and the Hawaiian Tramways was owned by those folks in London. So proceeds, profits, and everything else went to England instead of to Hawaii. And during this period, we moved from the monarchy into the republic. It gets very confusing. Unfortunately, I am not a student of politics. Steel rails and steel wheels are what my strong point is. And when I looked at kind of an overview that I put together using newspaper articles of that time to try and track the street railway systems from the omnibus to Hawaiian Tramways to Honolulu Rapid Transit to the bus, I was looking at 417 pages of information. Little too much to put into a half-an-hour program, and plus it's interesting, but only to a student of government. Work began in June, July of 1888 on King Street and Fort Street on the actual Hawaiian Tramways Company Street Railway. In January of 1889, so roughly 6 months later, the King Street line opened and was a 5-cent fare. Now, the King Street line ran from Palama to Rifle Range, and I do not know where Rifle Range actually was. I've tried to find it on old maps and everything else, and unfortunately I did not consult our historian emeritus, Bob Boa, because he could probably tell me where it was, but I'm sure it wasn't very far. The fare was 5 cents, and shortly thereafter, the line was opened into Waikīkī. Now, Palama being one end of it, and now Waikīkī being the furthest end, Palama to rifle range, 5 cents. You wanted to go to Waikīkī, 10 cents. So there were two different fare structures, although the lines were pretty much the same. The timetables were different, however. So you caught a car to Waikīkī was different than the car you caught to rifle range. So what did these things look like? Here's a photograph of a Hawaiian Tramways tram car. This is on Fort Street, circa 1890, probably toward the latter part of the 1890s. And you can see it's a relatively small car, pulled by two mules or two horses. These plied just as fast as the horse cared to go, although the drivers would try and maintain some degree of schedule. As could be anticipated, almost immediately when the service started using the mules and horses to pull these cars, there were claims of animal cruelty, letters to the editor, people up in arms that the drivers were beating the poor horses, working them to death. And of course, the Hawaiian Tramways Company refuted all of those. And looking through what few historical documents remain, we don't see a huge number or a significant number or even a few horse or mule deaths caused by being overworked. And when you stop and think about it, since that is your main source of power, that is how you're going to make your money, you want to take good care of your mules and horses and not overwork them, because it was more expensive to replace them than it was to maintain them. This 1901 photo is obviously a publicity photo. The folks there on the car are all dressed up in their finest. It is very well posed, but it shows the type of car that was one of the two types that was common with the Hawaiian Tramway system. This is obviously an open car, which was perfect for use in Hawaii. Other cities also had open cars, and some had convertible cars, but they were quite prevalent here in Honolulu. You can see at the very top underneath the letterboard what appears a striped piece of material. That's actually the canvas that, should the weather turn bad and the rain start coming down in torrents, the car could be enclosed with canvas, but it made getting on and off the car very difficult because there was no passage from front to the back. The only passage was from the sides. The system continued to grow, and also in 1901, this is a photograph taken on Kalakaua Avenue. And it looks like I've got two of the same picture here when I'm looking at. This could be interesting. The historian is messing up. But in this picture, you can see that there are two cars, and because we have such limited information on any of these photographs, I don't know if that's two separate lines or two cars on the same line. There are some reports that at times two cars were pulled by one team. Now, that would have seemed to have been excessive and probably contributed to a claim of animal cruelty, but we've never found any documentation of any type concerning that. And we'll go to the next one to see what Okay, this is why I have two. This is the same photograph that was colorized. Now, I have no idea who colorized this photograph, and I have no idea if the colors are in fact accurate. There's no specific documentation. However, based on what little information we have been able to find, the color of the tram car being a kind of a medium brown does appear to be correct. The roof color is completely by guess, but white is probably the correct color based on its higher heat reflective capability. Now, we talked about the open cars. Here is a car with the shades partially pulled down. That would keep the passenger somewhat dry from the shoulders up perhaps, but still allow boarding and unboarding, unloading. And in this case, it looks like there's only a single horse or mule, which would be rather unusual. They would normally use two. So I'm not actually sure where this photograph was taken. We know it's early 1900s, and that's when most of the photographs of the tramway were taken. Very few later in life. Now, in inclement weather, you were more likely to want to be on one of the enclosed cars. Now, you notice the car is enclosed. It has a center passageway, and the seats, instead of being running side to side, ran end to end. You'll notice also that both ends of the car are the same. These cars never turned around. When they would get to the end of the line, the team would be unhooked from one end, walked around, and then reattached on the other end. The driver would change ends, and they would proceed in the opposite direction. Control of the car, as far as its speed forward, was completely under control of the horses or mules. The only thing the driver could do was tell them to start, tell them to stop, and he had a handbrake that he could apply to slow and stop the tram car itself. As you can see, the streets of Honolulu were rather muddy at the time, so in any kind of a good rain, you had copious quantities of mud throughout the streets. The tramway also, every day, would sprinkle the streets because of complaints of dust flying around because of the passage of the cars. But this was offset by the mud that it created, and it did cause a problem for the citizens and for the company. The mud would stick to everything, the buggy tires, people's shoes, but under the terms of the franchise, they had to sprinkle the streets every day to keep dust down. So it was kind of like a catch-22. You can see now this picture is, we do have a date, circa 1910, and you see nothing's changed. The cars are the same. Here again, it looks like only a single horse or mule is in use, but there have been no improvements. Everything remains the same, and the citizens were beginning to become somewhat anxious about this. They didn't care for riding these cars anymore. They were difficult to clean. There were numerous complaints about their cleanliness, about their condition, about how they smelled, and the time of the horse-drawn tram car appeared to be coming to an end. There were also claims of overcharging, transfer fees. The courts were heavily involved in all of this, and there were numerous different directions given. The tramway company had arranged some of their lines so that you paid a 5-cent fare to go from point A to point B, but if you wanted to go beyond point B, you had to change cars, and you were now on a different line, and that was another 5-cent fare. So every time you changed cars, you got charged again. There was no ability to transfer. And the courts got involved with that, and they eventually decided that, yes, indeed, if you pay your fare to go to a certain spot, you're to be delivered to that spot for that fare. So the tramway lost that particular battle and wound up having to pay. Now, during the same time, the franchise was amended to allow the Hawaiian Tramway to use electric power. The original franchise specified horse or mule. Now it was changed that they could provide electric power, so that would pave the way to an electric street railway. They did not avail themselves of that particular opportunity, and instead continued to use horses and mules. The following photograph, here we see a changeover. So you've got one team being led away, and a second team has been hooked up. We say led away, but hard to tell. They could be backing in to take over. But this was a routine establishment, and I'm quite sure that depending upon the line itself, the patronage involved, that either one or two animals would be used to pull any particular car on any particular line. As time went on, and nothing changed as far as the horse cars, as we're approaching past 1910 into 1912, 13, and 14, the cars remained the same, the teams remained the same, and because there are so few pictures of these cars available, it's just interesting to keep an eye on them. Now, eventually, they did improve the cars somewhat, and this is a more modern car. This is probably circa 1917, but at their height, I don't think they ever had any more than 25 cars. So service was definitely limited. They had far more horses than they did cars. Well, during this time, the Hawaiian Tramways, having not availed themselves at all of the option to use electric power, a second franchise was authorized by the government specifically for an electric-powered street railway system. And this franchise was assumed by the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company. Now, there had been a lot of hard feelings with the tramway because it was funded by English interests, and London was seeing the most of the money. The Honolulu Rapid Transit was funded by home money. In other words, these were entrepreneurs living in the territory, in the state, in the kingdom, the republic, or whatever period that we were in at that particular time. And this is what created the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company. And by 1903, although the tramway continued beyond that in theory, it was absorbed by the Honolulu Rapid Transit Company. And because the HRT was still building out, the tramway was still used, but now it was run under a different administration, so to speak. So what happened to it after that point. This is a photograph of a ʻŌlelo railway train. And if you look carefully at the passenger car, that is a former Hawaiian Tramway Company tram car. It has been repurposed as a railroad car. The car right behind it, the small box car, may have been also from that same source, but based on the wheel arrangement and what it looks like underneath, I don't believe so. So at least one or two of these cars lived on after the end of the Hawaiian Tramway. Unfortunately, none of the cars were ever saved, and I can kind of see why. This is the only known artifact that remains of the Hawaiian Tramway Company. There are two wheels, there's two wheel sets here, manufactured by Miller and Company, Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1895. This is the only tangible remaining object of the Hawaiian Tramways that we are aware of. If you have something sitting around the house, out in the garage, grandma's attic, that's associated with the Hawaiian Tramways, please let us know. We would love to expand our level of knowledge and our information base to the maximum extent possible. Thanks for listening, and again, please come visit us at the rail yard. We have our regularly scheduled rides on Saturday at 12 and 3, Sunday at 1 and 3, and we have a ride at 1 o'clock every Wednesday. Come out, help us out, see what we're all about, and if you'd like to stay a little bit busy on your off time, we can find something for everyone to do. There's never a lack of projects, and we need volunteers to maintain this historical society and our history of they're